I'm here with songwriter, producer, DJ, and author of Then It Fell Apart, Moby. Moby, so happy to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So Moby, your name is a very unique name. Can you describe, what that name means to you and who came up with it?
Well, my legal name is Richard Melville Hall, and I'm related to Herman Melville, who wrote Moby Dick. And when I was born, my parents looked at me, and I was this tiny little white grub of a baby, and they realized that Richard Melville Hall is a very grown-up name. Like, it's a good name for a lawyer or an accountant. And as a joke, my dad called me Moby, thinking that that would be my infant joke nickname. I'm 53 years old. I have now been called my infant joke nickname for my entire life. So it's not a name I picked for myself. Like, my dad gave it to me when I was 10 minutes old.
Yeah, you can't argue when you're that young either.
It's hard to say, maybe we want to rethink this. But then again, as far as being named after Melville characters, Moby Dick's a pretty good one, as opposed to Ahab or Bartleby or Billy Budd. So, as far as literary characters go, Moby Dick's a pretty good one to be named after.
In the book, you talk about how you grew up in poverty and the long-term impact that's had on you. Can you describe that? Yeah,
I grew up in Darien, Connecticut, which is one of the most affluent places in the world. But my dad died when I was quite young, and so my mom and I lived in Darien because the schools were good, but we were on food stamps, we were on welfare, she was unemployed a lot. So until I was 18 years old, I'd never met another poor person. And growing up poor in such an affluent environment, it's disconcerting in a lot of ways. Because you have a constant sense of inadequacy, a constant sense of shame. You can't really bring people back to your house. You have to, pretend that the clothes you're wearing didn't come from Salvation Army or Goodwill. So even now, I've had, the circumstances of my life have changed a lot, but I still feel like, if you grow up poor, to some extent, you'll always self-identify as being a poor kid.
But isn't there some positive aspects of that? Can you be more empathetic to people who are poor and want to do some great things in the world because you can relate to them and know what they're going through?
Yeah, I think the positive side is, one, you don't fear poverty. I didn't like it, but I lived with it for so long. And then when I left home, I moved to an abandoned factory in a crack neighborhood, and I had no running water and no bathroom, and I was making around $2,000 a year, and I was pretty happy. And there's something liberating about that, about knowing that you can survive really challenging circumstances. And then it also does give you a sense of empathy for other people, whether they're battling socioeconomic adversity or whether they just feel disenfranchised.
You talk about how fame was a big driver for you, but with everything that seems good, there's always drawbacks. What was the biggest drawback from achieving success and being famous?
Well, when I first started having a degree of sort of like fame and material success, I thought that fame and material success were going to fix all of my problems. All of my issues, my insecurities, my anxiety, my depression. I thought that fame and money were going to fix these things. Not surprisingly, they didn't, because they never do. And so it's one of the things that I'm grateful for is that I've been able to see fame and a degree of affluence up close to realize fame and affluence are interesting. They're good tools, but they're certainly not capable of fixing any internal problems.
If you could remove one aspect from what you got from being famous, what would you remove?
Remove in what sense?
Remove as in if the attention, being able to walk outside and get privacy.
But I'm as potentially new age as this might sound, I'm actually grateful for everything because I really value the perspective that I have. And the perspective that I have is, by definition, the product of the experiences I've had and the experiences that I continue to have. So even the negative stuff, even the adversity is really educational. especially because we live in a culture where people glorify fame and wealth. If we were to walk down the street and ask everybody, like, what do you want? Their answers would probably be fame and wealth.
Even more so now.
Yeah. But then we look at people, I'll use myself as an example, but also look at Robin Williams, look at Avicii, look at Chris Cornell, look at Anthony Bourdain, on and on and on. People who achieved great fame and wealth, and it didn't fix any of their problems. In fact, oftentimes it makes them worse. So I'm really grateful that I've emerged relatively unscathed.
When you were at your lowest point, what was the first thing you did to start to revive yourself and your career?
Well, I bottomed out as an alcoholic and just an emotional mess for a pretty long time. There was about 6 years, from like 2002 to about 2008, when I finally got sober. And that bottoming out, as I said, it wasn't just like one or two bad episodes, it was hundreds and thousands. It was daily misery. And when I finally sort of emerged from it, because emerging involved admitting to myself that the things I thought were going to bring me happiness and meaning didn't. Again, whether that was fame, affluence, degeneracy, depravity, alcohol, drugs, all the things that I relied on to make me happy, I had to finally admit they weren't working. And then there's that huge challenge when you accept that the things in your life aren't working, but you don't have the skill set to replace them. So you have to start sort of like humbly, cautiously assessing the other things in your life to figure out what does actually work.
And who were some positive influences to help you get through that too?
And it's funny because we're sitting on Bleecker and Elizabeth, between Mott and Elizabeth. And when I was a drunk, the first time I got drunk in this neighborhood was 1978. So 41 years ago. But I also got sober in this neighborhood. And the best teachers I had in sobriety were the old alcoholics in AA. Also because we're a block away from the Bowery. So like the AA meetings around here, especially a while ago, were really gritty. It wasn't like fashion stylists who had maybe had like too many glasses of Chardonnay. It was like bottomed out Bowery drunks who had like lost kidneys and had hepatitis C, like really bottomed out people. But their wisdom, their simple wisdom, and it was very unconventional at times. Like I remember this old Bowery drunk saying to me once, he said basically the key to happiness is selflessness and spirituality. And this is like an 80-year-old bottomed out Bowery drunk who's probably still homeless. And he said, if you focus on spirituality and service, he said, you'll do okay. And I thought he was full of nonsense. Turns out he was 100% correct.
And a lot of stories you discuss in your book are based in New York.
Mm-hmm.
How did New York impact your worldview and how you see the world?
Well, I was born here in 1965, and then I moved up to Connecticut where I grew up as poor white trash, and then moved back here in the 80s. And I thought that New York, similar to fame, similar to affluence, was going to answer all my problems, or answer all my questions and fix all my problems. And just as there's nothing wrong with affluence, there's nothing wrong with fame, there's absolutely nothing wrong with New York. It's a wonderful place, but these are externals, and nothing external can fix internal. As much as we want it to, as much as like the financial district is there, we're in the epicenter of like materialism and worldliness. And everyone around here thinks like, oh, if they can just have what I think of as like the perfect existential portfolio, like the right amount of money, the right apartment, the right home, the right relationships, the right this, the right that, they think then they can be happy. It doesn't work. And that is the scariest thought for me, it was a terrifying thought. And then because our entire culture reinforces that idea that like New York, fame, affluence, etc., are going to fix everything.
It's interesting that you can feel like you have so many things in life, influence and power and money and fame, yet still feel empty inside.
Mm-hmm.
And when you feel empty, you also feel very isolated and lonely, and like you don't know what to do. So how do you handle that?
Well, before I got sober, I did what a lot of people did, was I drank more, I went to more parties, I slept around more, I did more drugs. We sometimes call it rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, saying like, oh, I'm miserable in East Hampton, let's go to Montauk. I'm miserable in Montauk, let's go to Fisher's Island. I'm miserable in St. Bart's, let's go to Bermuda. It's just like, just moving your misery from one place to another. This neighborhood is perfect for that. Like, oh, I don't like this bar, let's go to another bar. Oh, I don't like this person I just met on Hinge or Tinder or whatever, let's move to the next
Everything's
one.
disposable.
It's the next, it's the next, it's the next.
So you're never satisfied.
And part of is that we're not trained. Like, we're trained to believe that big things will fix small problems. We're trained to believe that like a loft in Tribeca will fix your internal problem. And the external stuff can be nice. Like, there's nothing wrong with a 4,000 square foot loft in Tribeca. It's not going to fix your depression. It's not going to fix your loneliness. It's not going to fix your anxiety. Or if it does, it's going to be brief. And part of it is within the actual context and background of the human condition. Being human is terrifying. We're alive for a few decades. Everybody we know will die. Everything we care about will turn into dust, including ourselves. We don't know if our lives have meaning and significance. So you can either pretend otherwise, pretend that an expensive watch and a nice loft give you meaning and significance, or the perfect Pilates instructor or something. But part of it is saying like, oh, we don't know. Like, this existential confusion that's shared by every human being on the planet. And part of it's accepting it and actually just being, not to, again, like sound like too much of a new age cliche, but like being present with what is right in front of you. And oftentimes the stuff that's right in front of us is wonderful, but we ignore it because we're looking for the next thing. So like,
so true.
You could be eating the most perfect organic orange and ignoring it while you're thinking about like someone from college who didn't comment on your Instagram story. And you're like, you know what, maybe ignore the Instagram story, ignore the resentment, and just focus on the fact that there's like a miraculous piece of fruit in front of you.
Yeah, and you talk about mental health in the book, about how you suffer from anxiety and depression, and there's somewhat of a mental health crisis in America and UK and everywhere in the world. People are feeling it. So how do you best deal with mental health, your mental health, and then like being empathetic to other people that you're interacting with? I
think first and foremost, the easiest is the physical side. Thoughts are complicated, emotions are complicated, personal histories are complicated, and trying to understand thoughts and emotions and our personal histories, like, that's very challenging. But our bodies, that we can kind of understand. Like, if you eat garbage, you're going to be depressed. You're going to be sick and you're going to be depressed. If you fill yourself with chemicals, you're going to be depressed. So it's almost like I think the Buddha apparently said, like, you can't really have a troubled mind in a very healthy body. So it's like, first and foremost, just get healthy. And I think for a lot of people, like, remove the toxins, remove the super refined foods, remove the animal products, and you'll find that like a lot of depression actually comes simply from your body trying to process stuff that it was never designed to process. And then once you've done that, then you can sort of, with a degree of clarity, address your thoughts, address your history, address your feelings.
And what's your creative process, and how do you decide which projects to take on and which ones not to?
Well, at this point, creatively, everything I work on is technically for activism and charity. Like 100% of the profits from the book go to animal rights organizations. My restaurant in LA, Little Pine, 100% of the profits go to animal rights organizations. So I love doing creative projects, but the goal is either advance activist issues that are important to me or generate money for causes that I care about.
So you've gone from being selfish to selfless.
I don't know if I'm selfless, but I certainly like the idea of trying to be of service when I can. Like if I was completely selfless, I wouldn't be watching TV. I wouldn't be like reading books. There's a lot of stuff I do that I just do for pure pleasure. So I'm certainly not like a selfless martyr. You know,
But it's coming from somewhere. You want to give back for a reason.
Well, it's the idea that the world, and I'm stating the obvious, the world is a very broken place, like profoundly, unspeakably broken. And I've sort of made a deal with myself. When the world is no longer broken, then I can go back to being completely selfish. But until then, it just doesn't make sense. Like, the world is broken because of selfishness, and selfishness is largely a product of fear. You know, fear of aging, fear of lack, you know, fear of scarcity. So, yeah, I'll go back to being a selfish, narcissistic, entitled D-bag when every problem on the planet has been fixed.
And what's your best piece of career advice?
My best piece of career advice is, and it might sound like a cliche, but it's above all else, love what you do. Nothing is more important than that, because if you love what you do, like why is Tesla, well, granted Elon's a little insane, but like why did Tesla do well? Because Elon Musk loves what he does, you know? And why did Apple, you know, become like the biggest corporation in human history? Because Steve Jobs loved what he was doing. If you love what you're doing, it increases the chances you'll be good at it. It increases the chances you'll work harder at it. It increases the chances that you'll like work through adversity. It increases the chances that you'll ignore the haters. Like, if you don't love what you do, you will doubt yourself every step of the way. If you love what you do, you will be so good at what you do and you'll work so hard at it. And then, like, for example, music. Like, if I make a record and it does well, fine. If I make a record and it fails, I don't really care because I loved working on it, you know? So that's
Totally.
the most important piece of advice I could have for anyone.
You'll just give up too quickly.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we seen people do that? It's like someone starts something that they're not sure about, it doesn't work out, so they stop. Same thing, start, stop, start, stop. It's like, just love, like be inspired by the love for what you do, and you will work 18 hours a day and be happy constantly.
Totally. Thank you so much for your time.
My
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.